I've somehow found the energy to make 7 of these now, and I think that's kinda neat. Anyways, let's just get started. Lucina is easily the most requested Fire Emblem character for the show. I haven't played Awakening, nor is she my preferred playstyle in Smash, but time travel games are always cool. So who are our options? There's Zelda, which, no. There's Ciri, which I think works, but I'm not familiar with The Witcher. There's Katana, which I also like, and Katana should be priority for the next MK matchup, but I have one preferred. Lucina versus Grovile. Specifically Mystery Dungeon Grovile, of course. This one's really overheated for no reason, but also really liked at the same time. It's kind of a weird balance. It's a battle between blade wielders whose futures were destroyed by a dragon deity, going back in time to try to stop said dragon, acting as an antagonist at first before joining the hero's party to defeat said dragon, at the cost of a friend's life. There's potential for a beautiful sounding track here, and the debate here is really solid if you use hero scaling. Honestly, so long as it ain't Marvel vs DC, I love hearing about cosmology scaling. Above all else, I grew up with the first 2 Mystery Dungeon games on the DS, and Sceptile is my favourite Pokemon of all time, so this one would mean a lot to me, and I won't let anyone convince me this matchup sucks. We all like dragons, no matter what media they're in. Shockingly, we've never had a dragon fight, and one of my most wanted is Gadora vs Deathwing. Ancient dragons often controlled by others whose presence alone alters everything around them. It's a relatively simple matchup, which is something I appreciate sometimes. I've never played Warcraft, nor have any plans to, and at the time of writing this, I've never seen any Godzilla movie. Horrible, I know, I'll fix that soon, I promise. These two just look awesome, and it's popular enough to happen during Season 11, if that is a thing that's happening, as mentioned in my prediction video. There's a lot of potential here too. Ghidorah could roar and summon an army of kaiju. Deathwing could do the same to summon his corrupted black dragonflight. Ghidorah could bite down into Deathwing's shoulders, emphasizing that he has multiple heads while Deathwing only has one. But then 2 large sentient lava tendrils pour out of his shoulders to grapple with Ghidorah's other heads. The 2 could have a beam struggle between their breath attacks, causing a massive tornado of fire and lightning to surge up around them and just flatten the terrain. I definitely think that they could go crazy with the amount of collateral damage and natural disaster caused by these characters. How Gadora spawns a storm around him wherever he goes, and just flying around Azeroth literally shattered the planet's surface and caused massive tsunamis and earthquakes. So they need to do lots of natural disasters throughout the fight, all accompanied by an intense orchestral track by Brandon or Werewolf. As for who wins, I think the winner depends on what scaling you buy for both. Deathwing should upscale from planet plus levels of power if statements are to be believed, and there's no anti-feats to suggest that they shouldn't. And Deathwing also has some mental hacks to contend with as well. Ghidorah probably hasn't beaten speed though, and depending on the incarnation, maybe in size. The point being that it's another one of those very interesting debate matchups. I'm not upset it lost the 3D ballot since I voted for Colex, but I do wish it got a bit more love. Next up, we have my most wanted Fire Emblem matchup, that being Kylo Ren vs Adalard, the clash of royal descendant prodigies who were groomed by ancient evil cults to destroy the current government and religion, believing that the past should die despite being no better than the people from the past. Both lead great armies to do so, falling in love with the main protagonist and eventually being redeemed thanks to them. It's just a really solid matchup. Since they won't do a Rey episode, Ben is the obvious choice for a Disney-era Star Wars rep, with him being my favourite too. And with Dimitri done, there's not a lot of research needed for Adalard since they scale to each other to my knowledge. And there's solid debate here. You can have both armies clash in the background as the 2 fight in the foreground. You could even have them both show a bit of admiration for each other's combat capabilities and their political ideologies, since both are fairly similar in that regard. The track could be another orchestral composition by either Brandon or Werewolf, similar enough to Brandon's for New Standard. I really want this to happen, and I'm glad it's still fairly popular. After Hercules vs Wukong, I really want another mythology episode, and my most wanted out of these is Zeus vs Odin, the battle between the mythological gods of gods. This one thankfully avoids any religious issues that the previous episode had, and has a much closer debate since both get high on cosmological scaling and having similar experience, but I do think Odin out-hacks his thanks to being able to put Odin to sleep, steal his soul, and their similar strengths means him stopping Zeus from regenerating is a real possibility, or just take away his will to fight. Don't get me wrong, Zeus has a few win cons of his own, like outlasting his limited stamina, but there's not enough to justify a win for me. I see the fight taking place within a scroll again, with narration. Zeus, of course, being even worse than Season 1 Boomstick, spies on a woman using his shapeshifting, but doesn't realize that this is in fact Asgard he's in, forcing Odin to initiate the fight. You could have a mix of light and dark backgrounds with the colourful Asgard contrasting with the grey of Zeus's thunderclouds. There's a lot that can be done here, and an orchestral track by Werewolf would be amazing, I'm sure. This would easily be a highlight of any season, hopefully one we'll get soon. As mentioned before, we need a dragon duel, and my most wanted dragon matchup has to be Rayquaza vs Bahamut. Two classic gaming sky dragons, among the most powerful Pokemon and Final Fantasy summons, who both lend their power to those that they deem as worthy. A lot of the animation could be similar to what I mentioned for Gadora Deathwing, having beam clashes, potential for planetary destruction, and so on. But debate here is yet again another close one, which, come to think of it, there's a lot of close matchups at this point in the list, isn't there? Both can reach planet level to multiversal with their scaling, so I'd be interested to see what the research team think. Rayquaza's always been a favourite of mine ever since Smash Brawl of all things. I don't have a lot to say here. A couple weeks after writing this script, I have played Final Fantasy 1 for the first time, which is the only Final Fantasy I've played, and Bahamut only has a small cameo, being the character who upgrades your party to their upgraded forms. I don't have a lot to say here, just have Devil Artemis animate this. I think he could pop off with the Mega Rayquaza animation, and the visuals would be gorgeous, easily a season highlight if done correctly. This one is one of those that used to be super popular, but has declined as other matchups have gained traction. I still really like Gandalf vs Dumbledore. I'm not sure if that's a hot take anymore or not. It's a classic legacy matchup between fantasy novels' two most iconic wizards and mentors. And yes, I know that it's probably a massive stomp for Gandalf, thanks to him scaling to creatures such as the Balrog, but Dumbledore is still impressive in his own right, reacting to light speed and creating a dimension the size of Berlin. Regardless of the iffy debate, it has great track potential, and the animation could be a visual feast, with Gandalf arriving at Hogwarts in search of the One Ring, with Dumbledore trying to be reasonable, but Gandalf insisting that this is a matter of planetary destruction. Honestly, I don't know how this could escalate into a fight, but just imagine for a minute that it does. I can see a moment where Gandalf breaks a shield spell only for Dumbledore to use Accio to summon the Sword of Gryffindor before Gandalf can harm him with his own sword, only to disarm the White Wizard before Gandalf grabs his sword and melts it with his bare hands. Ideally, I'd have the fight leave Hogwarts at some point, with Gandalf knocking Dumbledore through a window or something, only for them both to recover and Albus firing a Reparo spell to fix the whole of Hogwarts, making way for a respectable exchange between the two. I also like the idea I read that Dumbledore transforms a tree into a dragon just to fight Gandalf. There's just so much that you could do here. Maybe have Gandalf take control over some Dementors, making way for the final clash with Albus using Expecto Patronum. You could also have Dumbledore enter Gandalf's mind, only to see the horrors he's witnessed, with the Elder One demanding he use the Killing Curse. And when Dumbledore eventually dies, you can have him hand over his tear memories to Gandalf, and Gandalf can make the surrounding area full of life as tribute to Dumbledore. You can probably tell I really like both franchises and this matchup. Please do this matchup already. Cora. There's a lot of opinions to be said about her show and her character. Maybe another time. For now, I want to talk about who her options are for a potential return. Now, I don't think she needs to return, since her episode against Storm was fairly solid. But even people outside of the Versus community have called out the Death Battle team for this episode feeling like spite towards Cora, and I sort of agree. Clearly, a lot of love was put into the episode, but when you pit Cora against a Universal Plus threat, who isn't even her most popular option, yeah, that's a bit suspicious. Anyways, who are our options for a redemption episode? There's Ray, which the crew have stated they didn't do purely because of the controversy it would bring, which is one of the silliest things I've heard from the team. I'll get more into that when I eventually rank Season 8. That being said, I think it's a great matchup. There's Boruto, which no, and there's my preferred, Cora vs Delson. I don't love either of these two or their shows and games, but I still really like them, even if I do prefer Atla and Infamous 2. I think I prefer Second Son to Infamous 1, however, but not by much. Both of them can be pretty cocky at times, which can make for some great banter between them. I like the idea of them starting off the fight pretty laid back, and then starting to take it more and more seriously as it goes on. Their abilities play off each other greatly. Delson using Cora's firebending to get more smoke, Cora countering video with waterbending, earthbending and concrete have some good stuff, Air and neon can allow for some really impressive movements. We even have a moment where the lighting goes down, except for their abilities, emphasizing them. There's a lot of potential with this matchup, and I barely scratched the surface here. To top it all off, this is also surprisingly debatable, with it essentially being a stats versus hacks matchup to my knowledge, unless you want to scale Delson to the beast, which I'm iffy on. Thanks to Korra vs Storm sadly existing, this one doesn't have a high chance of happening, but the crew like Korra enough, so never say never. Speaking of matchups that could have easily happened recently, Boba Fett vs Wolf not happening doesn't bother me as much as Korra vs Delson. Boba vs Predator was a legacy matchup. Even before Death Battle existed, people debated and talked about the two of them interacting, so that one I can understand. But more on that when I eventually rank Season 9. Boba is one of my favourite Star Wars characters, and I'm one of the few people on Earth who liked the Book of Boba Fett. Wolf I've liked since Smash Brawl, even though I've yet to play a Star Fox game, but I intend on correcting that soon. So what does this offer for Boba that's different? Well, for one, since Fett vs Predator wasn't the most well received, Boba should get one last matchup to redeem himself. And two, we haven't had a spaceship fight yet. Having the Slave 1 and the Wolfen be the priority for the first half, and then moving to hand for the second half, is such a cool and unique idea. I'm sure there are other matchups that could do this, but this is the one I have the most love towards. Two cool characters and a very cool concept. What more could you ask for? Oh boy, here we go again. Beus vs Archus is a matchup I wanted in Season 7, and I still want it now. And I am not ashamed of it. The God of Destruction versus the God of all creation. It's such a fun idea. Of course, you'd have to use Dragon Ball Heroes here so that it's multiversal versus at least multiversal. I do buy Archus winning, even if you equalize their stats. Archus can put Beus in a time loop that negates a causality and bypasses time resistance, while also trapping him in a spatial distortion that prevents Beus' attacks from hitting or Beus from even moving. Archus can just negate or steal all of Beus' powers, or just erase him on a conceptual level while rewriting the history of the multiverse to make a brand new world in which Beus has never even existed. It sounds like overkill, but the stats being close doesn't make this a complete wash. But I have heard arguments for Beus winning, so maybe I'm just wrong. Brandon would make a killer track here too, probably with lyrics. As for why I personally like it, the contrast between the two is so vast that it offers a lot of potential as a whole. Beus' lazy attitude annoying Archus' divine nature. Archus' wider range of abilities and type changes means this fight will never be boring. With them flying through space, launching various types of attacks against each other that cause huge and beautiful types of destruction. And the scene of Archus using all his plates to combat against Beus' sphere of destruction is such a cool image that even if you're not a fan, you have to admit that you kind of see its value. So please, give this matchup a look if you haven't before. It's definitely worth it. Of all the quote-unquote overdue Marvel characters for the show, I'd say we're running out. Cyclops, Green Goblin, Punisher, and my favourite Marvel character, Loki. There's so much you can do with him, but who should they face? There's Ocean Master, which no. There's the Master, which works well and may be the most debatable, but I just have no interest in the Doctor Who franchise getting another episode. And then there's Discord, which works, but we don't need to see him return, as much as I'd want it. Of course, I'm leading up to Loki vs Kefka. I've never played FF6, although it is on my list of games to play. And yes, I know it's a stomp, and no, I don't fucking care. The crew like Kefka versus MCU Loki. No? That's not what the community wants. Anyways, I love Loki so much. They mean so much to me in ways I won't get into. Just know that he may be the individual character I want to see the most on the show. My number one ask is that Loki is presented as his comic book version, rather than the Joker-fied MCU Loki. There's a lot that can be done here between the two tragic tricksters. The fight could start with Kefka transforming and destroying everything, and Loki plays along, only for Loki to start shrinking the screen more and more as the fight progresses, and eventually trapping Kefka. One of my favourite uses of Loki's God of Stories powers was him utilising the literal comic panels to trap the Beyonder, so something similar could be done here. Or he does the same thing Old King Loki did in Loki Agent of Asgard, where Old Man Loki could just easily change history, and just wipe Kefka's existence. I mean, heck, Loki could feel a bit of pity and remorse seeing a bit of himself in Kefka. He uses his powers as the God of Stories to change the narrative of his story, where Kefka gets to live a happier life where he is accepted in another timeline of Final Fantasy VI. Yep, this of all matchups could have an emotional death. Weird, I know. I feel like this one's inevitable, I just don't know how inevitable though. And there we have it. With only 3 parts to go, I'm looking forward to wrapping this series up. I hope I convinced you on at least one matchup here. Stay safe, and as always, be excellent to each other.